Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues and cohorts, Patsy Freeman. Patsy, welcome to you.
Thanks. Delighted to be here today.
Good to have you back. And our other colleague, Leb Tannenbaum. Leb, how are you, sir?
I am well and very excited to be with Ben again.
Yes. Well, and there you go. So you let the cat out of the bag. Well done. We are excited for today's episode to welcome back Ben Pring to the program. Ben, if you remember, joined us a little over a year and a half ago, way back in episode 10. Today, Ben is currently Research Vice President for Gartner for General Managers. In addition to that, Ben is the author of 3 best-selling award-winning books. First, in 2014, Code Halos, How the Digital Lives of People, Things, and Organizations Are Changing the Rules of Business. Then in 2017, What to Do When Machines Do Everything. And then just prior to joining us last year, Ben's third book came out, Monster, a tough love letter on taming the machines that rule our jobs, lives, and future. Now, Ben's been on the cutting edge of workplace trends for almost 4 decades and is well known for his provocative but accurate predictions about the future of IT. He's been recognized by several prominent organizations, including Analytica, who named Ben a leading influencer on the future of work, by Thinkers 50, who named him a leading management thinker, and then by Gartner, who awarded him with their prestigious annual Thought Leadership Award. And yet, in spite of all of these distinguished accolades, I'm pretty sure that Ben's proudest accomplishment to date is that he is the first person ever to appear twice on this show. So congratulations, Ben.
I've made it.
I think that calls for a speech. Ben, welcome back to the Frustrated CEO.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Liv. Thank you, Patsy. It's great to be with you. No, it's very nice to come back and talk again. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Ben, I know our listeners will want to know, especially hearing from someone with all of those accolades and all the experience that you have.
I feel old listening to that, gee.
You look great. So what you are seeing in securing the talent, so it's kind of the bigger frame. What are you seeing that people need to understand in securing the talent that they need to scale and grow?
Yeah. Well, I think it is one of the biggest challenges, certainly in the clients that I work with, that tend to be big technology vendors, technology services companies. That's really one of the biggest issues that they have. And I think it's the same issue that CIOs have at the moment, is there's a kind of refresh going on. There's a generational shift, I think, going on in technology. I've talked previously about the sort of 2 diverging tribes of IT. There's the sort of old school IT, and then there's the new generation of IT, and then everything centered around the phone, and everything centered around the sort of user experience and social media, and just a whole new generation of people and technologies. And that managing that shift, if you like, that refresh, recognizing which skills are, perhaps aging out, which are less relevant as they sort of align with the technology as that changes, and then new skills that people need aligned with new technology. That's a very difficult calibration that a CIO or a general manager in a big vendor has to organize and arrange and sort of manage. And I think it is almost kind of number one job at the moment, because if you can't get that new talent, if you can't get people with expertise in the sort of leading edge tools and methodologies and skills and attitudes and aesthetics, you're sort of on a burning platform. And I think one of the things that, we obviously talked a lot last time about COVID, and we were sort of in the middle of that at that time, and how was that going to change the world? I think one of the things that's become very apparent now with COVID, not entirely in the rearview mirror, but certainly hopefully sort of behind us, is that the organizations that had put in place sophisticated digital channels to market, routes to market, who had a sort of algorithmic front end, who had a modern user experience for selling and for managing their supply chain and managing their people. Those companies, COVID was a problem, but it was kind of a speed bump, and they dealt fine with that. the companies that didn't have those channels to market, those platforms, those technologies, which were in essence sort of pre-digital analog businesses still, COVID was existential. I mean, it was a life or, and still is a life or death challenge. And I think that explains why there's such demand in the marketplace for skills and services and capabilities at the moment, because a lot of businesses, a lot of CIOs are sort of catching up. They realize, digital transformation, which is a bit of a woolly phrase to describe a lot of different things, but digital transformation, whatever it is no longer elective, it's mandatory. If you're not putting in place these channels to market, building these skills, building these capabilities, using data, using machine learning, all of those kind of leading edge things, then you're really in trouble. And so I think that's the issue, that skills, talent is in short demand, the leading edge of that is in short demand, and you've got to get that rather than your competitor, and that's tough.
That is tough. I have one follow-on question as we continue to open this up. So I was on a call today with a global leader, and when you talk about this generational shift or new kind of digital talent, have you seen any movement in the fact that they might be coming into an organization but managed and led by the old school, older generation of people who are in those VP roles, and and maybe some thought about how does that older generation adapt? And kind of welcome and connect with someone who grew up, with technology and is maybe more purpose driven and whatever else the characteristics are. But I'm just curious what you're seeing. And anything that might help our listeners.
No, I think that generational aspect of it is very real, and I've sort of been talking about that for quite a while, and some people sort of got it, some people understood it. I think it was sort of invisible for a lot of people. I mean, at a very kind of macro level and at a very crude level, I mean, and some people use this word in a pejorative phrase, some people don't, but this is the sort of emergence of the woke generation into big businesses now. And of course, if you think about that generation, there's a very strong Venn diagram overlap between that generation and this next generation of digital skills that we're talking about. So if you're a middle-aged CIO in a big bank, and you have to attract and retain and manage and optimize that generation, then you can't manage them in the way that perhaps you were managed 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You have to be sensitive to these things. And I think that is a tension in a lot of businesses at the moment. I think there is a very real sort of schism, if you like, between older folks who've been around for a while and perhaps look at some of the technology, look at the UX of a kind of the TikTok generation and think, well, this is ridiculous. This is not real IT. But of course it is. It's becoming, a very, very big deal. You think about Shein, the Chinese retailer. I mean, that's basically AI with TikTok on top of it, and that's one of the biggest retailers in the world now. So if you're a retailer and you're uncomfortable with that generationally, because that's not how you bought clothes or you built your retail business, that's an issue. I've talked about a guy for a few years now who some people may know, a guy called Clive Davis. You may have seen him on American Idol. If you're a big music fan, you may know him because he's one of the most famous sort of A&R men, executives in the record business for a long period of time. And I think I don't know how old he is now. He's pretty old, but I think he's still basically the CEO of a big record label. And I've pointed to him because in a way, his story is quite interesting in being an older person who's kept in tune with the times. And how's he done that? And it's, in a way, it's a simple answer. It's this whole notion of reverse mentoring. He surrounds himself with younger people, and and this is the key to it, I think, is he separates his own ego from what he realizes the market wants. And I think this is one of the problems older managers, how older executives have as they age. They find it hard to separate their ego, what I want, from what the market wants. I imagine when Clive Davis goes home of an evening and is doing the washing up, as if he's listening to Frank Sinatra. But when he's in his office, in the morning, making a deal about who do we sign and who do we create a big marketing campaign, he's leaning on those younger folks, that reverse mentoring. This is what the kids want. This is what's selling, and it's not his taste. And that separation of ego in a business context, I think a lot of senior executives find that hard to do. And in this generational shift that's going on, I think that's becoming, more and more important.
Oh, that's brilliant. I was just thinking of like how many times there's like a big group meeting or a team building thing, and if the older generation brings in, we will rock you. What the heck was that? Music's important as well. That's great.
It's interesting that you bring up Clive Davis, because I literally just saw his name in a headline the other day. He's associated with the new Whitney Houston movie or documentary that's coming out. And so, to your point, to be able to stay relevant all of these years, clearly willing to engage others and then check the ego at the door to listen to them.
Yeah, I think it is a difficult thing to do. But I think, building on this point, that if you want to stay in the game, if you want to stay relevant in music or in technology, music's changing all the time, and technology's changing all the time. And I mean, again, I've seen this through my career, the last 20 sort of plus years writing about the cloud and software as a service. A lot of people, grown up IT, thought that was ridiculous and stupid, and we're not going to put our apps in on the internet. What are you talking about? And so that generational change, I mean, still playing out amazingly to me. Some people still, have that debate, and cloud and SaaS is still the exception rather than the norm in terms of the overall installed base of technology. But that generational refresh that's going on the whole time, I mean, that's just life, isn't it? It's the circle of life. And as I say, if you want to stay in the game and bring and marry the characteristics, the quality, the benefits you have of being around for quite a few years, to marry that with the energy and the aesthetic of this new world. Again, that's what Clive Davis, in my mind, sort of epitomizes. And I think it's a sort of good role model to look at and think about, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it too.
So I'd be curious what other, you're talking about the mid-level manager managing the younger generation. What other, in addition to, putting your ego aside, which is no small task, what other skills or behaviors would you say are needed?
Well, I think this notion of reverse mentoring, which isn't a new idea, of course, and I'm sure you've all talked about this and thought about it quite a lot. I mean, it's more talked about than actually done. In my observation and my experience, and again, I think it speaks to this notion of, well, I'm the senior guy, the senior lady, I know what's going on, and I think one of the great success stories in technology, certainly in the last 10 years, and there are books being written about it already, but I think the definitive book of this hasn't been written yet, is really the turnaround in Microsoft. What Satya Nadella manufactured within Microsoft, really from a company that was, aging out, again, relating it to the sort of generational shift. And then when he took over the hot seat, it's about 8-9 years ago now, recognized this generational shift in technology and in skills and people was happening. And he's talked about this quite openly on the record. He adopted this notion of the beginner's mind, You know, he's the most senior person, one of the biggest vendors in the marketplace, the most successful vendors in the marketplace. But he basically had the humility to say, well, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe we don't know everything. Maybe we need to look at this afresh with this notion of the beginner's mind. And I think the mechanics of that, the tactics of that, was going and speaking to a lot of people that perhaps for a more egotistical executive he wouldn't have spoken to. He wouldn't have gone and spoken to that 28-year-old programmer who knew more about TikTok than he did. He wouldn't have gone and spoken to people that, you know, were beneath his pay grade, if you like. But they did that very systematically. Again, trying to understand both the technology, the culture, the aesthetic of this new generation, and in doing that, really reignited Microsoft. And it's an incredible story, I think. And I think, again, people could take inspiration from that. Not to be defensive, not to be, oh my God, this isn't for us. This is the world. One of the phrases I sometimes think, you know, you hear a lot of kind of older people as as they age out or they get closer to that, they sort of moan and they say, oh, it's the end of the world, about this, that, or the other. It's not the end of the world. Maybe it's the end of their world. And again, if you want to stay relevant individually or corporately, you can't do that. This is an endless cycle, and fashions change, you know, approaches change. And people like us who preach disruption, you can't sort of preach disruption on the one hand and then not like it when it washes up on your own shore.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm writing that one down. Ben, you mentioned the pandemic, right? Talk about disruptors. When we last spoke, it was, I must say, February or March of 2021, we were still in the middle of the pandemic. We were still, I think, right around that time, a lot of companies had shifted from just trying to survive through this thing into more of, okay, this is the new normal. We don't know how long this is going to be. How can we thrive in this? How do we capitalize on some of the disruptions? I remember explicitly you talked about the transformation of the office space. Instead of having this place that people would be coming to every day, it would be turned into more of a workspace and a meeting space, and you know, the people would come to a couple of times a week potentially, and more collaboration that way. The death of the cubicle. There are still organizations struggling with that hybrid work model. To use a phrase that you have used in a lot of different trends you've talked about, that to me it feels like that genie's not going back in that bottle. And yet there are companies that you're seeing CEOs who are trying to bring everybody back. And so catch us up. You know, what are you seeing? Where do you think that's going?
No, it's still a burning question. I think it's still an unresolved question. I think it's realistically going to take years for this to play out and for the sort of new equilibrium to establish itself and be a kind of new norm. Because as you rightly say, Patrick, there are CEOs on the record messaging about we need people back in the office. And yet, on the other end of the continuum, big organizations are letting office space go, not renewing leases,
right?
Recognizing, that the genie isn't coming back to the office. HSBC, big financial services bank, one of the biggest takers of office space in London, they basically said they're collapsing that amount of floor space they've got enormously, 80% or so. Even Salesforce in San Francisco said they're going to start reducing their footprint in the Salesforce Tower. So I think it's still a hot debate. I personally think that the normalization of this sort of virtualized work that we're going on, we're sort of engaged in now, I think it has become completely normalized. And I think to imagine that this doesn't continue, that doesn't become a completely major plank of how we work in the future, I think that's a misread. I saw a nice headline in the New York Times today saying our homes became our offices and now offices are becoming homes. I think that's quite an interesting way, and clearly that's going to be, and Richard Florida, for people who know him, who's sort of right in the middle of this conversation, has talked about this quite a bit, the sort of redesign, the recalibration of central business districts all around the world. So I personally think it's going to become very, very normalized. And I think that the model that I may have sketched out when we talked last was this notion that, you know, the role of the office is really three things. It's a showroom, so it's where you bring clients and prospects and influencers, you know, to show off how you're a player, that sort of thing. It's an R&D facility where you bring people together to cook the secret sauce of whatever it is you do, makes you different. And then it's a social space. And people are now beginning to use the phrase, it's the clubhouse, you know, it's the 19th. And the truth is that many offices around the world are sub-optimized for those three real uses of the space. They're not particularly social, they're not particularly collaborative, they're not particularly inspiring. And they don't really impress anybody when a client or a prospect comes there. So I think that's what we're going to see, a lot of recalibration of offices, a lot of thinking in that new way, and this separation between what I call sort of heads up work and heads down work. Again, we know through COVID that the heads down work, coding, typing, doing your expenses, doing your email, that's held up very well. But we all know that the heads up work, being together, collaborating, the energy we get from each other, that isn't so good on these sorts of virtual platforms. So yeah, when we need to cook that secret sauce, when we need to be together to leverage that energy that we get off each other, let's come back into a cool space and a nice space, not that horrible, you know, cubicle with a Coke machine in the corner sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how I think more and more people are thinking about it. And again, in many of the conversations I'm having with senior leaders in vendor side organizations at the moment, that's very much the way the wind is blowing.
I remember you did talk about that last time, and I'm glad you brought it up again because it absolutely bears repeating. And I think you didn't. This was new this time around. You said, you know, that a lot of those spaces are suboptimal for those three functions. And it's a year and a half later, and there's, you know, a lot of, we hear this a lot from employees, you may as well. The employees go back into these spaces that haven't really changed, right? Nothing's
even worse than they were when they left them.
Yes, and because
18 months of a lack of TLC, and it's just depressing and demoralizing.
Right. And not only that, that and the fact that you know, in a hybrid work model, not everybody comes back on the same day.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are some employees who feel like I come back in and it's a graveyard. It's you know, at least before it was dark and dank and it was cubicle and it wasn't, but at least there were a lot of people and there was light.
You tell your husband, I'm going to schlep into the office today. It's going to be an hour there. And then I'm going to sit in my cubicle and I'm going to be on video calls with people.
I could have been at home. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And yet they're still doing that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, again, I think you relate these themes are all related. They're all sort of Russian interlocking dolls, aren't they? This relates to this talent war that we started talking about. Because if you're trying to win the next generational talent war, and that's what you're offering people, I mean, good luck winning that war. You're not. You're gonna lose that.
Absolutely.
So again, I think there's business imperatives underneath all of this, and they've all been bubbling up for a long period of time. COVID sort of rocket fueled them into being real issues. and now CIOs and people, they, their peers, these are very real issues.
Mm-hmm. Ben, it makes me think of something else, and I'll give an example. But the question is, what might be lost in this conversation that we're having? And one of the things, so I've been doing some work in the construction industry, and one of the organizations that is really successful to some degree has built their sales engine because one or two senior people, in this case it was actually a founder, had this incredible network of people that came from many different activities that this person was in. And the younger sales people are digital, they're the way they can connect and build a similar network for themselves is in question, right? And then there's potentially the issue of, yeah, I'm really comfortable. I work alone. I work at home. I connect with people on a screen. But what might be lost that you're seeing as this continues to unfold, and say looking out 5 years from now, saying, oh, I'm starting to notice something that I should have picked up on early.
I think a lot of people are worried about that level, and I think there are very real risks in that, both in the commercial side, the selling side of it. Yeah, because that human contact, looking somebody in the eye. I mean, I do a lot of presentations. I used to do them, in a big room. Now I do them online, like this. And I mean, they're obviously very different. It's like it's a different world. It's like it reminds me of like the jazz singer. When the movies went to talkies, and some people could transfer from silent into the talkies, and some actors couldn't. It's a different skill set, and the skill set to stand on a big stage or to be in a restaurant with somebody and sell is very different, and obviously very important. And that if we lose all of that, we're going to wash the baby out with the bathwater, maybe. But again, I think the answer to it is coming back to this separation of tasks, elements within a job. When we really need to be together for that moment of relationship building, of closing the deal. Let's be together, and let's be together in a nice space. But when we can just do a lot of it virtually, online, let's use those tools as well. Because I think that ties into one of my sort of big thoughts at the moment. Hopefully, you'll be the judge of that. But one of my big thoughts at the moment is, and you said this, Patrick, very well, that in the COVID panic, obviously, a lot of people put in place workarounds, in essence, rushed laptops out to people so they could work at home, put in place, quite rudimentary systems, and lots of challenges around security, things like that. But let's think about now that we've established a sort of baseline. To imagine that this is as good as it gets going forward is probably a mistake. I can't help thinking, when you look at a website, when you look at Amazon's first website, now it looks ridiculously rudimentary, doesn't it? Almost simplistic and stupid. And I think in a few years' time, we're going to look at these tools that we're using. I'm not going to mention any names. And we're going to think these are rudimentary and crude and a bit simplistic. And I think there's a huge wave of innovation going to emerge, and it's beginning to emerge with cool platforms like StreamYard, to do the virtualized work much more elegantly, much more interestingly, much more functionally. And obviously the metaverse gets wrapped into this conversation. I had my sort of, part of me likes that, part of me doesn't. But I kind of think that from a CIO's perspective, and from big businesses' perspective, and all the processes and systems and platforms that enable this hybrid environment that we're now in, there's an opportunity to sort of re-engineer a lot of these processes, these systems. It feels to me like we might be on the cusp of, for some listeners and watchers may remember the sort of BPR era of the early 90s. It was the collision between a kind of new generation of technology, ERP technology as we now know it, and then new thinking, this whole notion of don't automate, obliterate that came out of Index, part of CSC, Hammer and Champney, if people remember that. The collision of technology and a new idea created this huge wave of BPR, which really gave birth to the IT services industry at scale, and drove Accenture, drove EDS, drove big services companies forward. And I think we're on the cusp of a new wave of that, where we can use new tools with new ideas and innovate this whole virtualized experience, the way that we work in the modern world. And of course, let's not forget that moment when we need to be together. I don't want a robot doctor. I don't want a robot teacher for my kid. I don't want a robot salesperson. We want that human experience. In fact, Gartner's just had its symposium conference series in Orlando and other parts of the world recently, and the room's been absolutely full because people want to get back together, come back together to have that human experience. So let's not lose that. Let's keep that, but let's embed and explore the potential of innovating how we work like this when it's right to work like this.
And I'm hearing you say, or let me check this out, that we have to be really intentional now, where before it was all mushed together, right? We had digital, we had people at work, sometimes we met together, Now we really have two separate worlds where we're trying
that's right. And that's right. It's a very good way of putting it, Patsy, because the norms of work that all of us have experienced for the last 30, 40, 50 years have grown quite organically, quite through attrition, through accretion. And we know there were a lot of barnacles on the bottom of that boat. And then we've had we've hit an iceberg. And now we do have to think, to use your word, which I agree with entirely, intentionally about the new world that we want to build. And of course, that's scary to some people, challenging to a lot of people, but it's moments of that disruption. It's moments when sort of S-curves suddenly jolt and change and shift that is really the fuel for entrepreneurs. It's the fuel for people to think differently, new ideas, bring things in. And that's when, in whatever competitive race you're involved in, that's typically when things shift. Somebody stretches further ahead, somebody falls further behind. When it's plain sailing, we all, boats all sort of rise at the same level. We've got a moment of discontinuity here where we do have to be intentional. And the people who are successfully intentional, they're going to be the big names and people we talk about, in 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ben, you mentioned not wanting a robot doctor. When you think about industries that were really, again, everybody was impacted by the pandemic in one way, shape, or form. But one way I've heard you speak about a particular industry that was really impacted by the pandemic was the medical profession, right? Healthcare, and how technology had always been prevalent behind the scenes, but the customer experience, not so much. We still went to the doctor. We still had that face-to-face, and telehealth completely changed that. What industries are you seeing are ripe for that next kind of disruption? Retail comes to mind, but maybe not that. What are you seeing? What's next? Who should be watching out?
No, I mean, it's a great point, Patrick, that the healthcare industry, incredible disruption, and certainly in some countries around the world are really struggling to sort of come back. Where I come from in the UK, the Nationalised Health Service there is really struggling to deal with the demand and sort of put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle back together again. Telemedicine, I think, has been great. I've leveraged telemedicine consults. I'm sure lots of people have, and by and large, they've been absolutely terrific. And again, I hope that they become normalized within this sort of hybrid world that we're talking about. But the notion that, you know, I'm going to have that end-to-end experience with a piece of software entirely, I think that's still science fiction the way out. But I think that those models, and again, the melding of old and new, is probably happening in lots of different industries. I mean, certainly in financial services, you know, the hated bots are getting more sophisticated, and I don't know whether you guys use them, and some of the big banking platforms now have, you know, pretty sophisticated conversational AI bots on them. And of course, we're on the cusp of a potentially very big and interesting wave of what people are calling digital humans or avatars. And this is all sort of really comes out of this whole world of what to do when machines do everything. I don't know whether people have looked at Unique out of New Zealand. If you haven't seen that, check that out. I mean, that's pretty incredible to me, the similitude of those avatars and the ability to deploy them in lots of different fields. And again, in a virtualized online experience like this, they're very, I mean, to me, they're well over the past the Turing test. I mean, they're well over the uncanny valley of, a strange digital avatar. So yeah, you could begin to see those deployed in call centers quite routinely. You could begin to see those employed in lots of different areas. Triage within medicine, within the legal space. Imagine, you know, a LexisNexis with a digital avatar on the front end of that. So there's a lot, I think, potentially coming. And again, this is the innovation that people who are, you know, close to following GPT-4 at the moment. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. We wrote that book, Machines, What to Do When Machines Do Everything. It's 5 years ago now, and we started writing it 2 years before that. So it's sort of 7 years, and I've had the sense that when that book came out, and it was gratifying that a lot of people were interested in it. We had a lot of conversations about these sorts of things, the rise of, you know, machine learning, the rise of AI. A lot of people kind of grappled with that, thought it through philosophically. Some people acted on it. Some people did things with it, material things with it. But we sort of thought we'd put that idea to bed in a way. Yeah, we've looked at it, yeah, but it's okay. It's not. We're still all going to be employed going forward. Let's not worry about it too much. 5, 6, 7 year later, come back and look at GPT-4 and where that's going to go, and look at some of the other platforms that are coming out. For those of you who are online watching this now and want to look at something interesting after this is finished, go to, apologies, there's another UK reference, but go to The Guardian, which is one of the UK's sort of leading newspapers' websites. There's a fantastic article there today where the journalist had a very, very clever idea to go to some of the leading artists in the UK and commission them to play around with GPT-4 and see what they came up with. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's absolutely extraordinary article to look at. I highly recommend it. My point is simply that the technology is continuing to advance very, very quickly, and the application of that into all sorts of areas, I think it is going to be very, very profound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ben, do you see in any of these conversations coming out about, you know, sustainability, you know, the climate, the
Yeah,
the energy requirement for technology, or is that more just sideline stuff?
no, I think that is a big deal, and has been for a while. And I think I sort of was signaling to people that I talked to in the last, probably a year, 18 months, 24 months ago, that I thought that was becoming prime time, that was going to become completely mainstream. And I think that has happened to a degree. I think the sort of macroeconomic potential slowdown that we're steering into at the moment may push that the action rather than the discussion out a little bit further, because again, if you're a CEO or a board or a CIO thinking about battening down the hatches for tougher economic conditions as we go into Q1, Q2, then some of that green rush, as I've talked about, I suppose is still elective, not entirely mandatory, to use that phrase again. But I do think it's the big macro backdrop for the rest of our lives, for the rest of anybody's life, even if you're 20 and coming into the workforce at the moment, solving the issue with technology, with innovation, but also addressing, as you quite rightly say, the challenges that technology has. I saw a stat the other day saying that the energy requirements to run a world of EVs would negate all the benefit of having the EVs in the first place.
Yes.
So that so that there are huge structural issues, and then of course technology I think is ultimately going to be the savior of all of this. Not everybody shares that opinion, and maybe I sound too techno-utopian, but I remember talking to somebody very inside the velvet rope around the fact that quantum engineering, which is still in its infancy but becoming more important, more real, and quantum and things like graphene in the semiconductor supply chain becoming much more real. But quantum computing, quantum engineering, let alone quantum computing, it's going to have the potential to manufacture materials that are 1,000 times stronger than current things like aluminum and steel, and 1,000 times lighter. So imagine an EV which is 1,000 times stronger and 1,000 times lighter. Imagine a regular gas car, 1,000 times stronger, 1,000 times lighter. I mean, that's the sort of game-changing innovation that will probably be the real answer to these issues, rather than a lot of sort of tinkering around on the edges, which it feels to me that we're sort of engaged with currently.
Wow.
And I watched a webinar that you did, brilliant, on taming social media. I'm sure this will come to mind for you. Taming social media before it eats us alive.
Yeah.
It was like equal parts informative and sobering / terrifying. CEOs, our listener, frustrated CEOs, constantly hearing about how they have to be on social media in order to capitalize on technology, in order to reach their customers faster, quicker, in order to stay competitive. And yet we're all intimately aware of the inherent challenges of social media, right?
Yeah.
Heck, what it does to mental health and addiction and employee productivity and happiness. And how do you balance that as a CEO?
Yeah, no, I mean, I continue to think about this and continue to watch the regulatory, it's easy for me to say, regulatory sort of framework come in place to handle sort of some of the downsides of this. I think for CIOs who perhaps are less interested in the sort of big socioeconomic aspects of this and the sociology of it, although of course any CIO with children themselves has a front row seat to what the impact of this, watching what the behaviors and the lives of their own children. But I think for CIOs, the real issue at the heart of all of this, that they are 100% tasked with figuring out, is the leverage of data, the use of data. Data, is the new oil. We've all heard that cliche a million times, and there's huge truth in that. But we also know that oil creates pollution, and data creates pollution as well. And I've observed that many insurance companies, banks, have been very, very reluctant to really materially use data in the way that it could be used, because they're reluctant to sort of put their head above the parapet and run the risk of leveraging that data in spooky ways, creepy ways. So I think, again, CIOs have got to, and there's lots of research coming out of Gartner focused on exactly this at the moment, is really having, again, to use the word that Patsy used, intentional postures towards the use of data. What data can we use? What data should we use? What data is really relevant to be used? And I think a lot of people are still figuring that out. And in the world of shadow data brokerage and in the whole CRM, the whole sales process, obviously that's a completely vital raw material in that sort of production process. But we're still stumbling around to really figure out how to use that data in a positive way and not get sucked into a lot of the the bad use that we've all personally probably experienced and we've seen. And of course, not to politicize any of this, or not to sort of touch too live a wire. I mean, this is a fight that Elon Musk has put his hand up to jump right into the middle of, and God love him, because it's going to be you can see he's getting arrows from every direction at the moment. So it's a really tough one.
Do you think there's any possibility? I mean, it's conjecture, but do you think there's any possibility for regulation, for greater regulation, to provide more guidance, more of a framework to help address some of the issues that you mentioned?
Well, I think that is emerging. I mean, I think it's begun to emerge. GDPR, these are all baby steps. Regulation coming out of California. There's more and more regulation bubbling up in lots of different areas. There's a big new law being debated very hotly in the UK at the moment. Again, third mention of the UK. I have a contractual obligation to talk about England, even though I haven't lived there for 23 years. Child. I think the program is called Childhood Online Protection, and again, it's a very, very complicated discussion. And what's that old phrase? One of the tests of genius is to be able to keep two completely contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time. Right. Not that I'm claiming to be a genius, but I can see both sides of the debate, because the free speech side of the debate, right, is worried that the sort of regulation coming in is going to, be abused, and scope creep will happen, and we start to get into issues of free speech. And obviously those issues here in America are much more constitutional than they are in the UK, but they're in essence the same issues. I personally, and this is what the Monster book was really about, I mean, a lot of this is very complicated, but the simple thing to me is keeping young people away from the dark side of social media and the internet. And I don't think that's as difficult a challenge to fix as some of these other challenges. We have driving licenses and driving tests before you can get in the car. We prohibit young people drinking and smoking, and you can't join the army, you can't get married. There are age thresholds for all these things, which are completely normalized. Of course, people abuse them and try and get their way around it. But if we were unprepared to put laws in because people would abuse them, we wouldn't have any laws at all. So I think it's completely reasonable to think that young people should be prohibited from using these, because again, I think the evidence is bubbling up all over the place. And you mentioned, Patrick, with young people and mental health challenges, again, which all are obviously being worsened by COVID, and the lockdown and people being stuck at home. I mean, these are very, very difficult challenges. Technology is right in the middle of them. CIOs are right in the middle of them. Many of them are not issues that CIOs are directly going to touch, like that CIO of an insurance company. I'm just not, that's too complicated for me. I'm not going to go anywhere near it. We'll be a laggard because I want other people to take those arrows. But again, I think people like us who work in tech and love tech and have made our living in it, I think it behooves us. We have a responsibility as whatever influence or voice we have to try and keep tech in a good place.
Mm-hmm. Ben, it leads me to another question. So we have CEOs listening, CIOs, we have leaders listening, and this is what I hear you saying, and take it wherever you want to take it. But if regulation is, because in the big macro sense, is going to continue to take a lot of time, is it incumbent upon a CEO to look at their own company? They probably still have core values, and we work a lot with organizations around organizational culture. Is it incumbent upon them to develop some internal self-regulation for their organization now, as opposed to kind of waiting for something else to show up that's going to help?
Well, philosophically, I completely agree with that, but obviously that sort of has echoes of Alan Greenspan, doesn't it? That the market will self-regulate, and we all know it doesn't. So that's why we have laws. That's why we have regulations, because you'd think that businesses would self-regulate, but we have bubbles and crashes, and that doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to happen. I do think that the sort of regulation, which again for a lot of tech people is an ugly, dirty word that they hate, and anytime anybody talks about that, they sort of, oh, you're a Luddite, you're sort of Luddites hiding under a tech veneer. But I think that's the reality. And again, technology has gone from being, the guys with a few pens in their pocket protectors to being the most important thing in the world in our lifetime. We've lived through this, haven't we? We've been building Turing's cathedral. And technology is in the middle of everything now. It's in the middle of economics. It's in the middle of business. It's in the middle of government. It's in the middle of entertainment. It's in the middle of every aspect of our lives. And we as people in the technology industry, we're now touching all sorts of different things. Again, ERP, conversations about ERP didn't talk about children's health. Because the technology wasn't really touching it, but now technology is touching our children's health and our children's lives, and it's touching how we govern ourselves. Going back to the Elon Musk and who gets blocked and who gets cancelled and all this stuff. So regulation, ergo, is of course going to become more and more of a big deal. And I think, again, philosophically, if I was in a position of leadership in a large organization, I'd be trying to take, again, third time leveraging Patsy's word, an intentional stance on this. And I think some businesses are, and some leaders are, and I take my hat off to them. You can also see that, the second you say white, somebody out on Twitter is going to say black, and vice versa. So again, the counter argument for businesses has always been to be politically neutral, and you can see lots of big businesses struggling as they try and express a socio-political position on something, and the backlash of that. But I do think net, to your point, which is a good one, really understanding this, whether it's at the data level or whether it's at other aspects, is it's smart to me. It makes all the sense in the world.
I have one more question before we get before I exhaust mine. I'll ask my question and then give my colleagues a chance to ask their last questions, and then we'll switch into let's get practical. So Ben, more forward thinking, futurist. Again, I was so excited to have you on today because so much of what you talked about a year and a half ago just played out. And so, you know, I am one who is paying attention to what you're talking about, what you're thinking for the coming year and beyond. And I read an article, you were talking about new jobs that could emerge for the next decade or in the next decade to help us navigate, capitalize on disruptions and things where we are today. And two of those, there were a number of things on there. Two, I think, that were very relevant to our listener, to frustrated CEOs. One was a work from home coordinator, and the other is a chief purpose planner. We've talked a lot in recent episodes about purpose and younger millennials and Gen Z wanting to work with purpose and putting pressure on organizations to be clear and explicit about their purpose, so that I mean, for a variety of reasons. So, can you talk about those two positions, what you envision them doing, and what frustrations of a CEO might they help address?
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that, Patrick, because that work from home coordinator idea that we had, that was way pre-COVID, and we floated that. People like us, many watchers and listeners now, who've been working routinely at home for many years. I mean, I've been working at home for sort of 25 years, so we've been the very unevenly distributed. And now that distribution has become much more normalized. And as we were talking about earlier on, optimizing work for this new at-home virtualized hybrid world that we're in. Yeah, there's going to be lots of, I think, specialities and best practice, how to run meetings online, how to run meetings in the metaverse, when to bring people together, what tools should we work in, what are the norms of collaborating online. We talk a lot online virtually like this nowadays, don't we? Lots of people still struggle to actually do any real work beyond talking. So I think, the way I've always thought about how jobs are created or destroyed is that they sort of emerge. They either disaggregate or they aggregate previously existing tasks. So if you think about the work from home coordinator, that's probably part of an HR manager's job at the moment, but it will disaggregate from that job and become a specialist standalone job, like an SEO coordinator, search engine optimization coordinator. 10 years ago, that would have been a marketeer's job. Now it's disaggregated into its own job. And the other one, the chief purpose planner, again, probably disaggregates out of an HR role into a specific standalone role. It's probably got aspects of legal aspects to it. It's probably got operational aspects of it. It's probably got marketing aspects of it. It's certainly got HR aspects of it. But yeah, again, there's a lot of talk about purpose and the need to create for this generation that we've been talking about, who want more than just a paycheck. Although, of course, many of them are going to be sort of nutted by reality when they don't have a paycheck, or they realize the house they want to buy is more than their paycheck's going to afford. So that's part of the process of growing up as well. But certainly there's a lot of truth to that. This socially conscious generation do want to align themselves with more than just a paycheck and more than just working for the man. And again, I think that's a great thing to be encouraged. And who isn't, even the most cynical of us or skeptical of us, who doesn't really want to be aligned with a purpose and trying to make the world better. I think the second older folks are cynical about that, we should probably pack up our tent and go home. So again, I think that sort of role, which is a quasi role, it's maybe an element of other people's jobs at the moment. And there's, again, there's lip service to it, and there's a veneer of lipstick on that proverbial pig. But it's a real thing again. And in this war for talent, needing this next generation of employees, if you don't have those people in your business, you're on a quick march to irrelevance, and who wants to be in charge of that?
Right. Last time you were here, you referred to that as an existential crisis, right? If you can't attract today's younger workers, then you're not going to be around very long. I don't think that's changed in the last year and a half.
No, I think it's just become more real, more pressing.
Yeah. Patsy Leb, any other questions you have before we switch gears into getting practical?
Not for me.
I just have one more.
Go for it.
Do you see, Ben, in organizations, perhaps another new job that will be around health or mental health?
Yeah. I think the mental health, again, for people of our generation, we never, certainly growing up in England, wasn't something.
England again.
Get a haircut and join the army and stand up straight. That was, I think, what my dad said to me. But it's a different world, and I'm not joking. I'm being flip, but I'm not really joking about it. I think it's a very real issue, a very serious issue, and I think, you can imagine again more and more sort of specialities, jobs emerging to help people with that. I mean, a lot of them are online. There's a lot of virtualized coaching that people are using already, and a lot of specialization in that. And I think in a work context, again, that's going to probably require specialized roles within the HR and sort of the manager's toolbox, if you like. You can certainly imagine people having to take that much more seriously. I mean, another job that we floated a few years ago, and it seemed sort of comical in a way, but again, perhaps it isn't so comical, was that in the sort of growing awareness of acceptance and embrace of diversity, however that continues to manifest itself, you begin to see the notion of genetic neurodiversity, and the acceptance of people on the sort of autism scale. And so there's probably a job emerging to manage those type of people and manage those types of experiences. Again, I mean, a lot of sort of new jobs by definition seem somewhat weird and comical when you first think about them, and but that's in a way the nature of disruption and innovation again.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think to your point earlier, I mean, hiring somebody for cloud computing at one point was a ridiculous notion.
Yeah.
Right. I was also fascinated to see that you wrote about that. Your first article on cloud computing was back in 1997. And I was thinking that was right about the time we switched, like we actually got email at the company I was working at. So I don't know how you pulled that one out, but well done.
It really is ancient history now. Yeah, I sometimes think that's like 25 years, and I've watched that arc. I've watched that narrative develop from being a complete. I was the lunatic shouting in the supermarket, "Avoid that guy! Don't talk to him," to it being completely the mainstream, normalized now. I sort of like to mirror that. What's the next 25 years look like? And one thing I've been writing about, one thing I'm interested in, we've sort of run out of time to talk about today, is this notion of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, which is this strange little new idea to sort of leverage the blockchain for organizational structure. And it feels to me like that has lots of echoes, maybe my own bias here, but it has lots of echoes to me of how the first wave of the cloud emerged and the first little kind of seeds of that. So Maybe you'll have me back in 25 years, Patrick. And we'll
No, we have to have you back sooner to talk about that so that in 25 years we can see if you were right. So, excellent. Well, I think we are at that point as we get to in every episode where we turn our focus on, okay, so what do you do about this, right? What do you do with what we talked about today? What can our listener, CEO, do to begin making progress, make inroads in her or his organization? This is a segment we call Let's Get Practical. So, Ben, if we give you that opportunity to go first, of all the different points that we've made and talked about and discussed, or to your point, maybe something we didn't talk about today, just something that you think, what does a CEO need to be focused on or thinking about in order to capitalize on what we've talked about today?
Well, I think if some of the things I've talked about today have resonated with somebody listening to this, watching this now, and they really are thinking, well, that kind of touched a nerve with me. I think the simplest thing, the most practical, almost the most basic thing that person, that CIO could do would be to institute a reverse mentoring board. Put in place half a dozen people lower down the totem pole, lower down the food chain, who you identify as, progressive, interesting, open, not intimidated by speaking to an older person like me, and set up a board meeting, a reverse mentoring board meeting once every quarter, like a regular board meeting. Bring those people into a space for a day. What are you thinking about? You drive the agenda. You tell me what's happening. Something like that might be quite useful for people, again, to get them tuned into things that they're not hearing. And I think there's all sorts of benefits that could accrue from doing something like that.
It's great. Beautiful. And to your point earlier, check your ego at the door.
Yeah.
If you're leading that.
You can't go to that board meeting and tell them what you're thinking.
Right.
You can't go and present to them. You want to. It's the complete inverse of that.
It's great. Any else you want to add before we jump in?
No, go for it. I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well.
Yes. Well, our thoughts are your thoughts because we took notes while you were talking. So, who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
And I'll only do a few, so there's room for more.
Okay.
One of them was pay attention to new technology before dismissing it. Because, for lots of obvious reasons, including my own bias, for whatever reason. Identify when we really need to be together, and don't do that by yourself because you're the leader. The emergence of what some people refer to as the woke generation does require some rethinking and new management skills. And the last one I'll offer is follow Ben Pring.
That's a good one.
That is a good one.
Yep.
You're too kind.
And we'll get to that at the end. We'll ask what's the best way to do that. So.
I think we're moving towards an annual podcast.
I like it.
Yeah.
Patsy, you want to go?
Yeah, I'd add one in the kind of reverse mentoring realm. Adopt a beginner's mindset. To be open to cultural changes, different generations of workers.
That's great.
And if you want to stay relevant individually or company-wise, you have to be aware of what's unfolding around you.
Good. All right, I'll throw in a couple and then open it up. Anybody wants to add more? Ben, I love this quote. You said you can't preach the value of disruption and then complain about it when it washes up on your shores. So I said I was going to write it down, and I did. You mentioned this the first time you were on, and you talked about it again. So it really is. And I remember this was on the Let's Get Practical back for episode 10. So, listener, if you still haven't rethought the use of your office space, there's no time like now. That the workplace of the future is a showroom, it's a lab, and it's a social space. And if yours isn't, if you are sub-optimized in any one of those three areas, then you are potentially not giving your employees what they need in order to be as productive. And then you made the point as well on top of that, Ben, that you may lose the war on talent because people are coming in and they're seeing half-empty cubicles.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily going to make me want to work there.
Yeah.
Let's see. You talked about sustainability. You were saying while your actions around sustainability might slow up a little bit with the economic slowdown, it's understandable, but your conversations should still be continuing, especially if you want to be positioned to capitalize on the green rush when things open up again.
Yeah.
I think you can stop the actions, just don't stop the conversations.
Yeah.
And then just the section talking about the addition of new positions and how your workforce might need to evolve, not for today, but for the future. And that's a conversation, whenever we get into succession planning, it's such an important topic. And we ask that question, not where are you today, but where do you think you're going to be? Do that honest and introspective work to figure out how does your organization need to evolve from where you are to where you ultimately want to be to support a new workforce with new needs, new technology, new locations, right? New work systems, work models. You mentioned a few. You mentioned like a work from home coordinator, the chief purpose planner, even someone with an eye on employee mental health and a neurodiversity coordinator. So whatever it might be for your organization, be curious and creative in thinking about where might the workforce be going and how do you position yourself for that.
Yeah.
I thought that was good stuff. Any others that we left out that anybody wants to go back and add? Ben, you as well.
No, that was terrific to hear. You were listening. I thought you were just all looking at Twitter.
I thought Patsy dozed off in the middle, but I guess not.
You kicked me
No,
under
it's
the
great.
table.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice, interesting for me to hear it back in a way sort of like that.
Yeah. Patsy or Leb, were there any more you wanted to add?
No, I think we've covered it at least. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I thought of is, also look for models like Clive Davis. If you're in that older generation who are someone at Microsoft who are successfully figuring out ways to lay down their ego and integrate and accept the new reality and new ideas.
Yep. Patsy, you had one more.
I do. That there's a distinction between heads down work, which is more of the technical, data processing, the task-oriented work, and heads up work. And previously, they've all been mushed together. They're not mushed together anymore. So be intentional. There's my word. Be intentional about designing the heads up work, which is more of the collaboration and the relationship building. And why am I getting face-to-face with you? I like that distinction.
Beautiful. Ben, thank you for again joining us. It was as fun as we knew it was going to be. If someone is interested in having you come to speak at their event, an organization event, or contact you for consulting through Gartner, what are the best ways to reach? What are the best ways to contact you?
No, well, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me on again. It's been great talking to you guys. I've really enjoyed it, and the hours sort of whizzed by. Well, I'm pretty visible in LinkedIn, Benjamin Pring at LinkedIn, at Benjamin Pring in Twitter. Hopefully I'm visible in Gartner. If you want to sort of formally come into Gartner and talk to Gartner, we'd be happy to do that. So yeah, I think people will be able to track me down if they want to do that.
Good. And all three of your books are available on Amazon.
All on Amazon, yeah. All continuing to sell, which is very nice to see.
Excellent. And we will make links available to all of your books on our website. So listener, that's where you'll find not just this episode's Let's Get Practical, but all of our previous episodes, companion Let's Get Practical. We encourage you to go there, download it. It's free. Read it, distribute it, but more importantly, do something with it, because as we like to say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Ben, thank you. It was great to have you back. Patsy and Leb, thank you again for another fantastic episode. Love you both. Listener, thank you for sticking with us to the end of episode 42 of the Frustrated CEO podcast. Connect with all three of us. Well, I'll say connect with all four of us on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect with you and get your thoughts. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, contact us. You can contact any of us through LinkedIn or through our website, thefrustratedceo.com. I think that's it. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Bravo. Thank you.
Good.
All right. Well done. And listener, we'll see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.